Your body will obey until my sons are born, Lone Lumberjack growled. To the widow vertical bar Wild West stories. The wind moved slowly across the dry plains, carrying dust and the faint smell of pine from the distant forest. A small wooden cabin stood alone near the edge of a narrow trail, its roof worn from years of storms and sunlight. Smoke rose gently from the chimney, thin and uncertain, like the life inside it. This was where the widow lived now, far from the noise of town, far from comfort, and far from the life she once knew. She had arrived on the land years ago with her husband, a hopeful man who believed hard work could turn wilderness into a home. Together they built the cabin with their own hands, cutting wood, digging earth, and planting crops that struggled against the harsh soil. For a time, life felt steady. The seasons came and went, bringing small joys, warm fires in winter, fresh water in spring, and quiet evenings under open skies. But the frontier showed little mercy. One winter came colder than the rest. Snow fell without stopping, and the rivers froze early. Supplies ran low and travel became dangerous. Her husband left one morning to trade for food in the nearby settlement, promising to return before nightfall. He never did. A broken wagon was later found near a steep ridge, and though no one spoke the words directly, everyone understood what had happened. After that, silence filled the cabin. At first, neighbors from the distant town offered help. Some brought food, others offered advice, though much of it felt heavy with judgment. Many believed a woman alone could not keep a homestead for long. They suggested she sell the land, move into town, or remarry quickly for protection. She listened politely, but refused. The land held memories. It was the last piece of the life she and her husband had built together. Days became long and heavy. Every task required strength, hauling water, chopping wood, repairing fences that broke under wind and time. Her hands grew rough, and her shoulders carried the weight of survival. Yet she moved with quiet determination. Each sunrise was another chance to prove she could endure. Still, fear lingered in small ways. At night, when the wind rattled the shutters, she kept a lantern burning longer than necessary. The wilderness was unpredictable. Wolves sometimes howled from the hills. Travelers passed occasionally, some kind, others less so. Being alone meant every sound felt louder, every shadow longer. One morning, as she struggled to pull a heavy log toward the cabin, she sensed movement behind her. Turning slowly, she saw a man standing near the edge of the clearing. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and still as a tree. His coat was worn, dust clinging to its edges, and an axe rested against his shoulder as if it weighed nothing. His beard was rough, and his eyes carried a calm intensity that made it difficult to look away. He did not speak immediately. He simply observed the land, the cabin, and her efforts. She tightened her grip on the rope she held, uncertain whether to feel relief or caution. "Need help?" he asked finally, his voice low and steady. Trust did not come easily anymore, but the log was heavy, and exhaustion had begun to slow her movements. "If you're offering honest work," she said carefully, "then yes." Without another word, he stepped forward and lifted the log with surprising ease. Together they carried it closer to the woodpile. His movements were efficient, practiced, the actions of someone used to hard labor. He introduced himself simply as a lumberjack passing through the region. He needed temporary work, he said, and a place to stay for a short time. He did not explain much about where he came from or where he planned to go next. Something about him felt distant yet reliable, like the mountains beyond the horizon. She considered the risks. Allowing a stranger onto her land could bring trouble, yet winter was approaching again, and the workload was more than one person could manage alone. After a moment of quiet thought, she agreed to let him stay in the old shed behind the cabin in exchange for help with repairs and chopping timber. The arrangement was practical, nothing more. The days that followed changed the rhythm of her life. The lumberjack worked from sunrise to sunset, splitting wood with steady strikes and repairing broken structures without complaint. He spoke little, but when he did, his words were direct and thoughtful. He respected boundaries, keeping his distance unless she asked for assistance. At first, she remained cautious, watching him closely. The frontier taught people to read small signs, how someone carried tools, how they reacted to sudden noise, how they treated animals. The lumberjack moved with patience rather than aggression. Even the horses seemed calmer around him. The town soon noticed his presence. When she rode into the settlement to trade supplies, conversation slowed as she passed. People whispered about the stranger working on her land. Some warned her to be careful. Others hinted at scandal, their curiosity sharper than kindness. She ignored most of it, focusing on what mattered: survival. Back at the cabin, the air felt different now. The sound of an axe striking wood echoed through the trees. The fence grew stronger. The roof stopped leaking. Tasks that once took her days now finished in hours. For the first time since her husband's death, she allowed herself to feel a small sense of relief. Evenings became quieter but less lonely. They sometimes shared simple meals near the fire, speaking about weather, crops, and travel. The lumberjack rarely spoke about his past, but he listened carefully when she talked. Slowly, the tension between strangers softened into something steadier, a partnership born from necessity. One evening, as the sun disappeared behind the hills, he watched her struggling to lift a heavy bucket of water. "You don't have to carry everything alone," he said. She paused, meeting his gaze. "I've had to for a long time." He nodded, as if understanding more than she said. The wind shifted, carrying the promise of colder days ahead. Clouds gathered on the horizon, reminding them both that another winter would soon arrive. The frontier did not forgive weakness, but it rewarded those willing to endure. As darkness settled, the cabin felt warmer than before, not because the fire burned brighter, but because the silence no longer felt empty. Neither of them knew what the future would bring. For now, survival was enough, and on the edge of the vast wilderness, two strangers began building something neither had expected: a fragile trust shaped by hard work, shared struggle, and the quiet hope that even the harshest land could offer a new beginning. The first signs of winter arrived quietly. The mornings grew colder, and thin frost settled over the grass like a pale blanket. Smoke from the cabin chimney rose thicker now, carrying warmth into the sharp air. Life on the homestead moved with steady purpose, shaped by the coming season. The widow woke before sunrise each day. She had learned that survival on the frontier meant staying ahead of nature. The lumberjack was often already outside when she stepped onto the porch, his axe striking wood with calm rhythm. The sound became part of her mornings, steady and dependable. At first, their work together remained practical. He repaired the barn doors that had long refused to close properly. He reinforced the fence along the northern edge where animals sometimes wandered through. He cleared fallen trees from the trail leading to the property, making travel easier. Every task he completed seemed to strengthen not just the land but also the fragile balance between them. Though he spoke little, his presence changed the way she moved through her days. She no longer felt as exposed when the wind howled at night or when strangers passed along the distant trail. Still, she remained careful. Trust was not something she gave easily anymore. The nearby town soon began talking more openly about the arrangement. News traveled quickly in small communities, often shaped by imagination rather than truth. Some believed she had made a wise decision by hiring help before winter. Others whispered that a lone woman should not share land with a stranger. Their words followed her during supply trips, hanging in the air like unspoken judgment. She ignored most of it. The frontier had taught her that people always talked. Survival mattered more than reputation. One afternoon, while she traded supplies at the general store, an older rancher pulled her aside. "You sure you know that man?" he asked quietly. "Strangers carry stories with them." She met his gaze calmly. "So does everyone else." The rancher nodded but said nothing more. His concern lingered in her thoughts as she rode back toward the homestead. When she returned, she found the lumberjack repairing the old well frame, his hands moving with careful precision. He looked up as she approached, offering a simple nod. "Town treating you kindly?" he asked. She gave a small shrug. "Town has opinions." He almost smiled at that. Days passed and the rhythm of work continued. Together they cut more wood than she had ever managed alone. They stored food carefully, planning for weeks when travel might become impossible. The horses grew stronger under his care, and the land began to look less worn. Yet beneath the steady routine, tension slowly grew, not between them, but around them. One evening, a group of travelers stopped near the property. They claimed to be passing through, but their eyes lingered too long on the barn and supplies. The lumberjack stood quietly nearby, his presence enough to discourage trouble. After a short exchange, the travelers moved on without incident. Later that night, as they sat near the fire, she spoke first. "You don't ask many questions," she said. "Questions don't always bring useful answers," he replied. She watched the flames for a moment. "People in town wonder about you." "They usually do," he said simply. His calm response made her curious. She wanted to ask more about his past, about the reason he traveled alone, but she hesitated. Everyone carried things they were not ready to share. As the weeks passed, small moments began to change how they saw each other. He noticed how she refused to give up even when tasks seemed impossible. She noticed how he spoke gently to the horses when no one else was listening. The silence between them grew less heavy, filled instead with quiet understanding. Still, differences remained. One morning, as they worked to move heavy logs, he reached out to take control of the task without asking. "I can handle it," she said firmly. "I'm trying to help," he replied. "I didn't ask you to take over." He paused, realizing she was not angry about the work itself but about something deeper. Independence had become her shield, and she guarded it carefully. After that, he became more aware of how he offered assistance. He waited for her signal before stepping in, respecting the balance she needed. Winter clouds gathered thicker in the sky. Snow began falling earlier than expected, covering the ground in a quiet white layer. The world grew quieter, sounds softened by snow and distance. One evening, as they secured the barn against the cold, he spoke more than usual. "Winter takes people who aren't ready," he said. She looked at him, hearing the weight behind his words. "You've seen it before," she said. He nodded slowly. More than once. There was a sadness in his voice she had not heard before. For a moment she felt the urge to ask what had happened, but she stopped herself. Trust grew slowly, like trees taking root in difficult soil. As snow continued to fall, their evenings near the fire became longer. They shared stories about small things, favorite foods, distant landscapes, memories of warmer seasons. Laughter came occasionally, surprising both of them. Yet the outside world did not forget them. A man from town arrived one afternoon claiming to represent a land buyer interested in expanding territory. He spoke politely but with an edge that suggested pressure beneath his words. "Land like this doesn't stay empty forever," he said. "You might consider selling before winter makes things harder." She refused without hesitation. The land was not for sale. After the man left, the lumberjack's expression grew darker. "He'll be back," he said. "You think so?" "Yes." His certainty made her uneasy, but she pushed the feeling aside. She had faced challenges before and survived. The storm season arrived soon after. Winds grew stronger, rattling the cabin walls. Snow piled high against the fences. Travel to town became rare, forcing them to rely on what they had prepared. During one storm, a section of the roof began to loosen. Without hesitation, the lumberjack climbed into the freezing wind to secure it. She watched from below, fear tightening her chest until he returned safely. Moments like that changed how she saw him, not as a stranger passing through, but as someone invested in the survival of the place. As days turned into weeks, the homestead felt less lonely. The work they shared created a quiet bond neither of them had planned. Still, unspoken questions remained between them, waiting for the right moment to surface. One evening, as snow fell softly outside, she realized something had changed inside her. The fear that once followed every shadow had faded slightly. In its place grew cautious hope, not the bright, easy hope she once knew, but something stronger, shaped by hardship. The lumberjack sat across from her, sharpening a tool near the fire. The light flickered across his face, revealing lines of experience and quiet endurance. Neither spoke, but the silence felt different now. Not empty, not heavy, but steady. Outside, winter settled deeper across the land, testing everything that stood against it. And within the small cabin, two people who had once lived alone began slowly learning what it meant to rely on another again. Winter settled heavily over the land, turning the wide plains into a quiet white world. Snow covered the fences, the trees, and the trail leading to the homestead. The sky often remained gray for days, making time feel slower and heavier. Inside the cabin, the fire burned almost constantly, its warmth pushing back against the cold that tried to creep through every crack in the walls. The widow had learned to move with patience during winter. Every task took longer. Water froze quickly and animals needed more care than usual. Yet she no longer carried every burden alone. The lumberjack worked beside her with steady focus, cutting wood, checking the barn, and keeping paths clear whenever the snow allowed. Though their partnership had grown stronger, a quiet distance still remained between them. They respected each other, trusted each other in work, but there were questions neither had asked. Both understood that everyone on the frontier carried a past, and sometimes silence was easier than answers. One morning after a heavy snowfall, a rider approached the homestead. The sound of hooves breaking through snow caught their attention immediately. Visitors during deep winter were rare and often unexpected. The rider turned out to be a traveling trader, a man known for moving between settlements carrying news along with supplies. His coat was covered with snow, and his horse looked tired from the long journey. After welcoming him inside to warm up, they shared a simple meal. The trader spoke about storms, about towns struggling with shortages, and about rumors spreading across the region. As he talked, his eyes occasionally moved toward the lumberjack, as if trying to remember something. Finally, the trader paused. "I think I've seen you before," he said slowly. The lumberjack did not react at first, continuing to eat quietly. "Maybe you have," he said. The trader studied him more closely. "You worked up north, didn't you? Near the logging camps beyond the ridge?" The widow watched carefully, sensing tension she had not felt before. "Yes," the lumberjack answered after a moment. The trader nodded slowly. "Heard stories from there?" Hard times, dangerous winters. The conversation shifted after that, but something had changed. The widow sensed it in the way the lumberjack grew quieter, his eyes focused on the fire rather than the room around him. When the trader finally left, the cabin felt heavier with unspoken thoughts. That evening, as the wind howled outside, she decided to ask. "What happened in the north?" she said gently. He sat still for a long time before answering. The firelight flickered across his face, revealing memories he had tried to keep hidden. "I had a family once," he said finally. "A wife and a child." She remained silent, allowing him space to continue. "There was an accident during winter. A storm worse than any I had seen. The camp wasn't ready. I thought I could protect them, but I couldn't." His voice stayed calm, but the weight behind it was clear. "After that I kept moving. Easier than staying in one place." The words settled between them like falling snow. She understood loss. She understood the feeling of a life suddenly breaking apart. "I'm sorry," she said softly. He nodded once but said nothing more. From that day, she saw him differently. His quiet nature was no longer mysterious, but deeply human. Beneath his strength lived someone shaped by grief, just as she had been. However, outside pressure soon returned. A few days later, another visitor arrived, the same man who had previously suggested she sell her land. He claimed to represent a wealthy buyer interested in expanding property across the region. His smile remained polite, but his tone carried pressure. "Winter can be hard for someone alone," he said. "Selling now might save you trouble later." "I am not alone," she replied calmly. The man glanced toward the lumberjack standing nearby, his eyes narrowing slightly. "Temporary help doesn't change long-term reality," he said. The lumberjack stepped forward slightly, not aggressive, but firm. The visitor eventually left, but the encounter left tension behind. That night, the widow felt anger rising. She hated how outsiders assumed she could not manage her own life. She hated the way they saw her as weak. The lumberjack noticed her frustration. "You don't have to prove anything to them," he said. "I'm not proving anything," she replied sharply. "I'm protecting what's mine." Their conversation grew tense. He suggested taking stronger action to keep unwanted visitors away, speaking in a protective tone that felt too forceful. "I don't need someone making decisions for me," she said firmly. "I'm trying to keep you safe," he answered. "I decide what safe means." The words hung heavily between them. For a moment, both stepped back into silence. The argument was not about safety alone. It was about independence, about trust, and about how two people with strong survival instincts learn to share space. Later that evening, he apologized quietly. "I forget sometimes that strength can look different for different people," he said. She nodded, appreciating his honesty. Winter deepened. Storms grew stronger, and the outside world felt distant. Yet inside the cabin, their relationship shifted into something more balanced. They learned to ask before helping, to listen before speaking. Small changes created greater understanding. One night, a loud crash outside woke them both. A section of the barn roof had collapsed under heavy snow. Without hesitation, they worked together through freezing wind to secure the structure and protect the animals. The experience reminded them that survival depended on cooperation rather than control. After returning inside, exhausted but relieved, they shared quiet laughter for the first time in days. Moments like that built trust stronger than words. As winter moved forward, the widow realized she no longer felt alone against the world. The lumberjack's presence did not replace her independence. Instead, it strengthened it. Together they faced challenges neither could handle as easily alone. Still, she sensed that bigger changes were coming. The land buyer would likely return. The past still followed both of them, and winter itself had not yet shown its full strength. Outside, snow continued falling silently, covering old tracks and creating new paths. Inside the cabin, two people who had once carried their burdens alone began slowly understanding what it meant to share them. The cold grew sharper as winter reached its hardest days. Snow no longer fell gently, but arrived in thick waves carried by strong wind. The world beyond the homestead faded into white silence. Trees bent under heavy ice, and the sky remained dark even during midday. Inside the cabin, the widow and the lumberjack prepared carefully for each day. Food was measured. Firewood was stacked higher. Every decision mattered now, because winter tested even the strongest people. One morning, the wind howled louder than before, shaking the walls and rattling the windows. The storm had arrived without warning, stronger than any they had seen that season. Snow flew sideways, turning the outside world into a moving wall of white. The lumberjack stepped outside briefly, tying ropes along the porch to help guide movement between the cabin and the barn. The cold bit into his skin instantly, forcing him back inside after only a few minutes. "This one will last," he said quietly. She nodded, already sensing the danger. Storms like this could trap people for days. They checked supplies again, making sure everything was secure. As hours passed, the storm grew worse. Snow piled high against the door, and the sound of wind felt like a living thing pushing against the cabin. The animals in the barn became restless, their movements echoing faintly through the storm. "We need to check them," she said. He hesitated, looking at the storm outside. "It's dangerous. They depend on us." He saw the determination in her eyes and nodded. Together they wrapped themselves in thick coats and stepped outside. The cold hit them immediately, stealing breath and blurring vision. They moved slowly along the rope he had tied earlier, using it to keep direction. Snow reached their knees, and every step required effort. When they reached the barn, they found part of the roof shifting under heavy snow. Without action, it might collapse. Working quickly, they cleared snow from the weak area, their movements slow but steady. The lumberjack lifted heavy sections while she pushed snow aside with a shovel. The wind roared around them, but they kept moving until the structure felt secure again. Returning to the cabin felt like crossing an endless distance. Once inside, they closed the door tightly, breathing heavily as warmth slowly returned to their hands. For a moment, they simply stood there, sharing the relief of survival. "You didn't hesitate," he said quietly. "Neither did you," she replied. The storm continued through the night and into the next day. With travel impossible, time slowed. They sat near the fire, talking more openly than before. Silence no longer felt like distance, but like comfort. During one long evening, she spoke about her husband for the first time in detail. She described his kindness, his dreams for the land, and the quiet way he believed in building a future through hard work. Speaking those memories aloud felt both painful and freeing. The lumberjack listened carefully, never interrupting. When she finished, he shared more about his own past, not just loss, but also guilt he had carried for years. He had believed that strength meant protecting others alone, without asking for help. Losing his family had taught him that even strong people needed connection. Their conversation changed something between them. The invisible walls they had both built slowly began to fall. Outside, the storm showed no signs of stopping. On the third day, they realized supplies would last, but only if used carefully. The widow suggested rationing meals more strictly, and he agreed without argument. Decisions became shared rather than separate. Late that afternoon, a loud crash shook the cabin. Snow had piled against the sidewall, pressing hard enough to create a dangerous weight. Without delay, they worked together to push snow away from the structure, preventing damage. The effort exhausted them, but it also strengthened their partnership. Every challenge forced them to rely on each other in new ways. That night, as they rested near the fire, he spoke quietly. "I used to think working alone made me stronger," he said. "But being here, it feels different." She looked at him, understanding the meaning behind his words. "Strength doesn't always mean standing alone," she said. He nodded slowly. Days later, the storm finally began to weaken. The sky cleared slightly, allowing pale sunlight to touch the snow-covered land. Stepping outside felt like entering a new world, silent, bright, and endless. They worked together to clear paths and check the property. The homestead had survived, though signs of the storm remained everywhere. Broken branches lay scattered across the ground, and snowbanks rose like small hills. As they worked, she noticed how naturally they moved together now, without needing to speak much. He anticipated tasks she might struggle with, and she guided decisions about the land with confidence. Their partnership had shifted from necessity into something deeper, a shared understanding built through hardship. However, the outside world soon returned with its own challenges. One afternoon, fresh tracks appeared near the edge of the property. Someone had visited during or just after the storm. The discovery created unease. "They'll come back," he said quietly. She felt a mixture of worry and determination. The land buyer's pressure had not disappeared. If anything, the storm might have encouraged outsiders to believe she was vulnerable. Instead of fear, she felt resolve growing stronger. "We face it together," she said. He looked at her with quiet respect. "Yes," he replied. That evening they prepared for whatever might come next, checking tools, securing gates, and ensuring the cabin remained ready for any situation. Yet despite the uncertainty, a new sense of confidence filled the air. The storm had tested them in ways neither expected. It had revealed their weaknesses but also their strength together. As night fell, they sat outside briefly, watching the stars appear above the frozen land. The sky felt wider than ever, and the silence carried peace rather than loneliness. For the first time since winter began, hope felt stronger than fear. Neither of them spoke about the future directly, but both understood that something had changed forever. They were no longer two strangers sharing work. They were partners facing whatever the frontier decided to bring next. And somewhere beyond the quiet horizon, new challenges waited, not just from nature, but from people who believed the land could be taken. The snow began to melt slowly as winter finally loosened its grip on the land. Thin streams of water ran between patches of ice, and the air carried the first hints of spring. For weeks, the widow and the lumberjack had worked to restore the homestead after the heavy storms. Broken fences were repaired, fallen branches cleared, and the barn strengthened against future weather. With each passing day, the silence of winter faded, replaced by birds returning to the trees and soft winds carrying warmth across the plains. Yet beneath the calm, both of them sensed that unfinished matters remained. The tracks they had found near the edge of the property had not been forgotten. One morning, as the widow checked the fields, she noticed riders approaching from the distant trail. The sight made her pause. She stood still, watching as three men rode closer, their horses moving steadily through the muddy ground left behind by melting snow. The lumberjack stepped outside, sensing her tension. He followed her gaze and nodded slightly. "They've come back," he said quietly. The riders stopped near the fence. One of them was the man who had previously tried to convince her to sell the land. His expression held the same polite smile, though something sharper rested behind his eyes. "Good morning," he called out. "I hope winter treated you well." "We managed," she replied calmly. He glanced around the property, noticing the repaired structures and the strong presence of the lumberjack beside her. "I'll be direct," he said. "The buyer I represent is still interested in this land. After such a difficult winter, selling might be the easiest path forward." She stepped forward, meeting his gaze without hesitation. "This land is not for sale," she said firmly. The man sighed as if disappointed but not surprised. "You should think carefully. The frontier changes quickly. Opportunities do not wait forever." "I have thought carefully," she replied. The conversation ended there. The riders eventually turned and left, but their visit left a clear message. Pressure would continue as long as she remained alone. That evening, she sat outside watching the sunset. The sky glowed with soft orange light, reflecting across melting snow. The lumberjack joined her quietly. "They won't stop easily," he said.
"I know," she answered. He hesitated before speaking again.
"You don't have to face this alone." She looked at him, understanding the deeper meaning behind his words. Over the winter, their partnership had grown into something stronger than simple cooperation. Trust had formed slowly, shaped by shared work and honest conversation. "I don't feel alone anymore," she said softly. The days that followed brought more activity to the region. Travelers returned to the roads as weather improved, and news spread that land buyers were trying to expand territory across the frontier. Some neighbors visited the homestead, curious about how she had survived the winter. Their attitudes had changed. Where once there had been doubt, now there was respect. One older neighbor told her quietly, "You proved more than most expected." She smiled slightly but said nothing. The approval of others mattered less than the quiet confidence she now carried within herself. As spring continued, she and the lumberjack began planning new projects for the land. They planted seeds in the fields, repaired irrigation channels, and rebuilt sections of the fence stronger than before. Their movements felt natural together, each understanding the other without needing many words. One afternoon while working near the barn, she paused. "You said before that you kept moving because it was easier," she said. He nodded slowly. "Do you still feel that way?" she asked. He looked around the homestead, the cabin, the fields, the land that had become more than a temporary stop. "No," he said quietly, "not anymore." Her heart felt lighter hearing that. Soon after, the land buyer returned once more, this time alone. His tone was less confident than before. "I came to make one final offer," he said. She listened patiently but did not change her answer. The land was part of her life, part of her memories, and now part of her future. Seeing her resolve, the man finally accepted her decision. Without threats or arguments, he turned and rode away. It felt like the closing of a long chapter. As weeks passed, the homestead flourished. New grass covered the ground, and the animals grew stronger. The widow found herself smiling more often, her movements filled with purpose rather than survival alone. One evening, as they finished planting seeds beneath a warm sky, she realized how much had changed since the day the lumberjack first arrived. Back then, she had lived with constant fear of losing everything. Now she stood surrounded by strength, her own and the strength they had built together. They sat near the porch, watching the stars appear, one by one. "I used to think this land only held memories of the past," she said quietly. "Now it feels like it holds something new." He looked at her, understanding without needing explanation. "Maybe that's what the frontier gives," he said. "Not just endings, but new beginnings, silence settled between them, comfortable and steady." In the distance, coyotes called softly, their voices echoing across the open plains. The sound no longer felt lonely. It felt like part of the world they belonged to. The widow leaned back, feeling peace she had not known for a long time. The struggles of winter had shaped them both, turning strangers into partners who faced challenges side by side. The future remained uncertain. The frontier always carried change, but she no longer feared it. Together they had built something stronger than either expected, a home rooted in respect, trust, and shared purpose. And as the firelight flickered against the cabin walls, the homestead stood firm against the vast wilderness, no longer a place of loss, but a place of new life waiting to grow.